Hey guys, what's going on? It's Brandon. So, while I did a decent job in the last video explaining the hypothetical debates between Harlan and General Motors, if it was indeed about warranty disputes about the Corvettes moving forward, I did a bad job of explaining the two different, because there are two distinct issues with the fuel system on the Z06. Now, granted, both of these issues can be solved by adding a second low-side fuel pump, which is a pump in the tank. It currently has one and needs a second one. The two different issues that exist, one of the issues also carries over to the General Motors SUVs, but it does not apply to the Stingrays so much, and I'll explain why here in a second. Okay, so I put on my seatbelt to avoid this dinging, and okay, let's see. So, the first issue, we'll start with the simple one. Fuel pressure. When you don't have adequate fuel pressure, your engine runs lean. When your engine runs lean, you experience detonation. Okay, so lack of fuel pressure results in detonation. What else results in detonation? Non-optimal octane fuel. And what else results in detonation? Fuel that has water in it to where as the engine measures its air-fuel ratios in the exhaust banks, it's seeing overly rich situations where the water heavy side didn't properly detonate, maybe, or whatever it is, and so it starts adjusting. You have 8 cylinders, and it starts making adjustments for one cylinder that's got too much water in it, and it affects the rich lean mixture of the other 7 cylinders. But in general, cars can usually operate through that within reason. You put bad gas in your car often, believe it or not. It's a pretty common thing. To some degree, and like I said, when it rains real hard or it snows and the snow melts, the water gets into the gas tanks. When you park your car for the winter, there's condensation that gets inside your fuel tank, and that gas and the water causes the ethanol to separate away from the gasoline, and you get what's called phase separation of your gasoline. So with a regular single high-side fuel pump, which is what all cars have except for the Z06 basically, with a regular single high-side fuel pump, you're guaranteed to have the same fuel pressure across all the different injectors. So because you only have one pump feeding them, and they're all unified via a connected rail, so you can't have different fuel pressures on that system. They're all going to be the same. The Z06 is different because you can have two distinct fuel pressure side to side because it has 2 high side pumps. Okay, so I've actually started to get into problem number 2. I got away from problem number 1 before I fully explained it. So let's go back to problem number 1. Problem number 1 is when engines run lean, they experience detonation. It hurts the bearings when the detonation happens. The bearings then wear wrong, and from that point forward, they wear out the motor, and eventually the motor fails because you spin a bearing and throw a rod, blah, 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 you have catastrophic engine failure. Okay. So that problem exists on the Z06 because the single low-side fuel pump is inadequate to supply the Z06 with all the fuel pressure that it needs, because the high-side pump's fuel pressure is dictated by the low-side feed pressure. If the low-side feed pressure drops to 20 psi instead of 70 or 80 where it should be during wide-open throttle, then the car makes 2,000 less psi at the high side. So the feed voltage from the low side pumps dictates the high side's ultimate PSI. So if you only feed at 20 PSI, you're only going to have 2,000 or less PSI after the high side pumps. If you feed at 70 or 80 PSI, you're going to have 4,000 PSI after the high side pumps. So that pressure at the high side through the direct injectors is what dictates the fuel flow. Too low of pressure, not enough fuel flow, engine runs lean, detonation, ruins bearings, okay? So the Z06 and the pickup trucks and SUVs, their low side fuel pump is susceptible to being inadequate when there's voltage drops in the system. Global B and all the different modules sometimes cause voltage drops in the system. It's like computer glitches. It just happens. When these computer glitches happen, if you're not going wide open throttle, you're fine. You're driving down the road, no big deal. But if you're going wide open throttle when the voltage drop happens, and you happen to be in a dense air situation where the engine is, the fuel system is ordered to supply huge amounts of fuel to match up with the amount of air that's coming through, so you're at cold weather sea level, the voltage glitch plus cold weather sea level, and poof, the car's running lean, it's experiencing detonation. This has existed since the C7 Z06, okay? This has existed on SUVs. And you say, well, how can that be, Brandon? The C7 Z06 required 650 horsepower worth of fuel. The SUVs don't. So why would the SUVs ever run lean? Because General Motors runs a smaller, a less powerful low side pump in the trucks and the SUVs than they do the C7 Z06. So you say, okay, well, we can just swap out the fuel pump in the trucks and the SUVs and solve the problem. Sure you can. General Motors can do that. It's going to be a recall across 800,000 vehicles by the time we're done explaining the problem to everybody. But with the Corvettes, with the Z06s, they can't swap the fuel pump. Why? Because there's not a bigger fuel pump. It doesn't exist. For in-tank fuel pumps, there's this law of diminishing returns where they can only go so big and then it starts overheating the fuel. So that the fuel pump manufacturers don't make one. Okay? So, because the fuel pump is cooled by the fuel is the fuel pump's heat sink. Okay? So with the C8 Z06 and the C7 Z06, they would need 2 low side fuel pumps to avoid this voltage swing issue. Okay? Because then with the 2 pumps, if you drop the voltage, or with the bigger pump on the trucks, if you drop the voltage, the pump is still able to pump enough to feed the high side pumps. Okay? It's still able to do it, or the 2 pumps are still able to do it with the lesser voltage, so it solves the problem. With the C8 Z06, it's unique. It has a new problem. And the new upcoming LT7 engine on the twin turbo car is also going to suffer the same fate. The issue is this. With the LT6, the C8 Z06 engine, okay? It has 2 high side pumps. So now we're going to move on to the second problem. The 2 high side pumps don't always pump at the same ultimate resulting pressure, because sometimes one has more water in the pump than the other one when you experience bad gasoline. Water causes the pump to behave at a different PSI. And for those of you who say, well, just use the computer to readjust the pump in real time when it starts running a different PSI. You can't adjust the high side pumps. The high side pumps are cam driven. They're a mechanical pump. The computer can't tell them what to do. The computer dictates their pressure via the low side pump. And you say, okay, well, that's fine. Just change the low side pump's pressure in real time and you solve the problem. Wrong, because the 2 high side pumps are pumping 2 different fluids moment to moment when you experience bad gasoline. So you cannot order the low side pump to solve the problem. It can't do it. It's impossible. It would need to raise pressure for one pump and lower pressure for the other pump, and it can't do that because the low side pump is only one pump. It can only feed out one pressure. You want to go higher, you want to go lower. We can't go both ways. This isn't Schrodinger's cat, okay? This is real shit, okay? We gotta do, okay? So the point is, what General Motors needs to solve the problem is they need 2 low side pumps, and those 2 low side pumps specifically need to be on 2 different feed lines up to the high side pumps, so that each fuel circuit, okay, each hydraulic circuit of fuel is closed. It's exclusive to each high side pump. That way they can turn up the voltage on one low side pump and turn down the voltage on the other low side pump moment to moment to get the high side pumps to behave identically again, like a car would if it only had one high side pump, where it pumps out an equal high side pressure across the board. So there's 2 separate reasons that cause the C8 Z06 to blow its motor. There's one reason why the trucks and SUVs blow their motors. Okay, with the fuel, when we're discussing fuel pressure, lack of fuel pressure because of the voltage glitches. One of the problems for the C8 Z06 is voltage glitch. The other problem for the Z8 Z06 is just simply bad gasoline, which is very common. It's very common. You don't realize how often you have bad gasoline. It doesn't last for the entire duration of the tank. There's a little pocket of water in there, and the car just doesn't run right for a few moments. The other 7 cylinders carry the 8th cylinder through the problem that experiences the water. It's not the end of the world. It's the end of the world with the C8 Z06 because that little pocket of water hits the high side fuel pump and causes 2 completely different high side fuel pressures. And now the computer's sitting there like, dude, what the fuck? What am I supposed to do? I only have control of one low side pump. What am I supposed to do to solve this problem? So what General Motors has done is they've written the program accordingly to where when it sees a discrepancy, it obeys the leaner of the two to make sure that the lean side doesn't run lean, but as a result, the other side runs super rich. That super rich then floods the chambers with gasoline, too much gasoline for the air to mix with, so there's leftover gasoline after each combustion. That excess gasoline runs down the cylinder walls into the crankcase, which raises the engine oil. Raised engine oil hits the backside of your piston faces on a cold start, and poof, your engine has a bent connecting rod, and now it's only a matter of time while you drive that motor that eventually it's going to fail. It's eventually going to experience catastrophic failure. Catastrophic engine failure puts oil all over our back tires, and that oil happens to have gasoline mixed in it now, so it's extremely flammable. It's explosive. So we're in a car that has an oil slick on the back tires and can burn us alive. You think the National Highway Safety Traffic Administration doesn't care about that? Guess again, Mark Royce. Guess again, Mary Barra. Sorry that Aaron Link and Taj and Mark Royce, or excuse me, and all the other executives and Harlan, that Brandon guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's so stupid, Mark. Fired, bitch. You were wrong, weren't you, Harlan? You have no fucking clue what you're doing, do you, dog? Fucking low IQ pieces of shit.